Welcome to episode 11 of the Strategic Momentum Podcast. I'm your host, Connie Steele. In every episode, we share tips, stories, and advice from progressive leaders and how they've been able to break through their business inertia and propel their business forward. For many companies, developing an effective marketing strategy and then subsequently executing against it can oftentimes fall short of expectations. In this episode, our returning guest, Greg Johnston, who's the SVP and Creative Director at AgencyQ, shares his perspective on why that is and what organizations need to consider going forward. Greg was previously featured in episode 4, in which we talked about leveraging self-awareness and self-evaluation to stay dynamic and evolve over time. You've been helping companies develop and execute their marketing strategies throughout your career. So what have you seen as the prevailing factor that causes companies to fall short on delivering on their efforts?
Fear. And what I mean by fear of something different, fear of the wrong message, and more importantly, fear of control. And some of it is also ego. Ego can get in the way, and ego can manifest itself in many ways through title, through accomplishments. And I also think that agencies contribute to that, to clients, of almost treating customers like they're not people. And I think that happens too, is that clients and agencies forget that we're dealing with people. When we deal with each other, we're people. We're not client and agency, although that's our titles. We are humans, and I think we forget about that. So the biggest challenge I believe that's happened for clients today is that control, because those that have figured out that they don't really they have control, full control, really are doing well. But those that are worried about that control word, I think that's what stunts their growth and their messaging, and that's why certain brands have lasted through the years and why others haven't. I mean, look at GE, what GE has done through the years, or even IBM. Those brands have continued to change based upon what they see that's happening today and tomorrow. So, when you strip away the fear and your own arrogance, you're more able to see what's really going on and even get an insight into the future.
I think from what we had talked about in our last podcast is this notion of self-awareness and self-evaluation in order to be able to evolve over time, because things are always dynamic. So for companies who can effectively establish that future vision and that strategy to carry them forward, it seems like you have to be aware of the concerns, aware of your fears, and almost in some aspect relinquish control to always manage, because things will change, but yet provide control to the consumer so that the power is provided directly to the end target audience. Seems like where you've got that opportunity to build a strategy that could last.
We complete things and move on to the next. We don't want to keep messing with things, for a more friendly word. And that's not the way the world works, has never had worked. Yes, sure. But when you buy a house, what if you didn't do anything to it for 10 years? It shows. So it really is that you constantly have to be aware. You constantly have to look at what you're doing to make sure that day that your message and your product is going to be relevant, because as we know, things can change so fast. Pop culture drives a lot of our decisions. And if we are not, as consumers, and if we as communicators are not current with pop culture and current behaviors of humans, then we're not going to be successful.
Right. I think this notion of being agile in business, while folks haven't specifically called that out, it seems like that's much of really what we're talking about. If you can't recognize the fact that you need to be agile in business and agile in all facets of the business, then it's going to inhibit you from being able to carry forth a strategy that will align to what your consumers will want, because they're not static in nature either.
Well, you're exactly right. And people don't care. They really don't care. Meaning they don't care what you have to say. You have to make them care, because they have so much that's going on in their life, and we are trying to interrupt their life. So we do everything here at AgencyQ with a lens of, why should I care? What's in it for me? And I didn't know that. That's from the consumer's point of view. You give something that emotional attachment for them to care, then they're going to say, oh, well, then what's in it for me? What's that rational benefit? So if you're telling people something they don't know all the time, they're going to come to you for advice, or they're going to keep coming back to you, to paying attention to what's happening, what's going on, because that's your job. That's your business. And that's because we have our attention is so fractured nowadays that we just have to make people care. And that's our biggest challenge.
My takeaway is that, to help determine an effective strategy and help think of your execution against an effective strategy is answering those questions of, why should I care? What's in it for me? And if you've done your homework and they come across as, wow, I didn't know that, then I think you've probably laid the groundwork of a really good strategy for your business.
You're exactly right. That is what we do before anything. If we can't answer and figure out these three things, then we can't go to a strategy. We can't know where we're going to go. We can't develop a hypothesis of a theory of what we might want to do. So before all your creative briefs, strategy briefs, engagement briefs, there's really three main reasons. Number one, helps us focus and the client. Number two, helps us save budget and time, because we're doing this together with the client, right? Mm-hmm. And then third, what you just said, it is the beginning of a targeted and effective strategy that then you could put all the tactics to, but you have to have that strategy first. So you're right. This is really the hardest part for anyone when they're doing anything is, where do I start? And we do this because that gives us a place to start. So we aren't worrying or thinking about where do we start. We already know where we're going to start. Where we end up, we'll figure that out, but at least we have a starting point.
Great. Another great, point and insight where I think you kind of nailed it on the head. And if you address those fundamental questions that you mentioned before, and why should I care? What's in it for me? And making sure that you deliver that big aha so that it subsequently creates the focus, keeps you in line with sort of the task at hand from a budget perspective, so you can lay an effective groundwork that I think it sets the course for success in the future.
Yep, I totally agree.
So thanks so much, Greg, for being on the show and providing your incredible perspective, because not everybody has that opportunity to hear from an agency and what their perspective is when they work with clients. So thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. It was lots of fun.
Developing and executing against your marketing strategy starts with a solid understanding of your customer, or if you're an agency, an understanding of your client's customer. You have to be able to answer, why should your customer care? What's in it for them? And what can you share to deliver that big aha? Addressing these fundamental questions will help you create the critical agency and client alignment, also save you time and money, and begin a targeted and effective strategy, which you then can apply tactics to. And as you execute the plan, things will change quickly. So you have to be agile. You can't just set it and forget it. But again, you have to have that strategy first. Thanks for listening to the Strategic Momentum Podcast. To learn more about Greg and AgencyQ, go to agencyq.com. That's AgencyQ. ncyq.com. If you want to hear previous episodes or even get show notes from this episode, visit us on our podcast page at flywheelassociates.com/podcast. I'm Connie Steele, and you've been listening to the Strategic Momentum Podcast.